Okay. Well, hi everyone. Again, thank you all for being here. We really do appreciate you being here to see not only the documentary that we're discussing on constitutional deportations, but also that you get to learn a little bit more about the history and our panelists. So I want to reintroduce myself again. My name is Esperanza Sanchez. I'm an associate curator here at Plaza, Cultura y Artes. Obviously, this institution has been here close to now 15 years in April. And we've had the pleasure to work with Dr. Balderrama, Dr. Valenciana. We've also worked with Lupe as well, and Vicente. So you'll see a lot of that in the exhibition. As I mentioned, when you do get a chance to come back and see in more detail. But obviously, you got to see more of the filmmaking and the documentary, and you'll get to learn more about the histories and stories. So I want to invite our panelists to come on up so we can have a discussion about this history as well. So feel free to sit down where you guys feel comfortable. Yeah.
I don't want Christine to. No me vaya a regañar.
We knew each other before the book was written.
So to my left here is Vicente Serrano, who is the director of A Forgotten Injustice, a film that was inspired by his grandmother, Nana Concha, and the millions of men, women, and children that whose stories were buried. In addition, we also know Vicente Serrano for an incredible journalist, and the fact that he's been doing a lot of this documentation of history, but also the fact that he's been doing a lot of the storytelling. I also have, next to Vicente, we have Dr. Francisco Balderrama, who is an emeritus professor of Chicano Studies and History from California State University of Los Angeles. Dr. Balderrama was the co-author of the Decade of Betrayal of Mexican Repatriation in the 1930s, and he was also selected as Outstanding University Professor in 1997. And next to Francisco, Dr. Cristina Valenciana was an associate professor emeritus in the Department of Elementary and Bilingual Education from California State University of Fullerton. She was also the daughter of deportee Emilia Castellana, and Dr. Valenciana was aware that her mother was deported as a child in 1935. And based off knowing that history and knowledge, she did a series of oral histories in order to document the unconstitutional deportations of Mexican and Mexican Americans in the United States. And that collection is now part of the California State University Fullerton's collections. And a lot of those oral histories are also included in the exhibition as well. And then to the left of Dr. Cristina Valenciana, we have And to the left of Dr. Cristina Valenciana, we have Maria Guadalupe Espinoza, who's also the daughter of deportee Ramona Espinoza. And Ramona, her siblings and mother were sent to Mexico, sent to Mexico in the state of Mexicali. And Maria Guadalupe is also a teacher and has been working with Dr. Balderrama, Valenciana, and also Vicente in order to ensure that this history is not forgotten. As I mentioned, our panelists have also, have traveled to the state capitol. Dr. Balderrama and Dr. Valenciana testified about the experiences of their families. And for over 20 years, our panelists here have advocated for the legislation, recognition of the repatriations, have also platformed the survivors' voices through recorded interviews, have given lectures, and conducted teacher trainings to raise the awareness about the repatriations that happen. So because of their great work, this is why we have this information out in the open, and it's something that's super important to continue. So I'm going to go ahead and take a seat if I'm able to. And then, thank you, just because there is a little unstable. Sorry, you don't help me. And thank you.
You can do it, Esperanza.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, so we'll start with, thank you. We'll start with our question, and I kind of want to start with the origins a little bit because obviously we're starting with the documentary, and it's very important, and we want to talk about the stories, right? So I want to start off with Maria. Maria, if you don't mind sharing about your mother's stories and how it inspired you to become a teacher and become involved with our panelists here to share this history.
has her own
And I
mic.
teach in yes, as I was saying, I'm an educator, I'm a teacher, I teach adults, I also teach young adults at the university level, and I'm a clinical coach of student teachers. So that's what I do for a living, but one of my avocations is family history. I'm the self-appointed family historian in my family, my extended family, which basically is genealogy. And I can remember as a young child, a 12-year-old, asking my grandmothers, you know, wanted to know like their lives, where they were from. So it's a long, lifelong interest of mine. And as I got to, you know, I remember staying with my grandmother at the border, my mother's mother, Felicitas Castro, who was raising her kids here in City Terrace, and who baptized her children here next door at the Placita, what we call the Placita. And I just remember looking at her, and this is as an adult, thinking there's something it doesn't make sense that such a capable person should end up, you know, at the border, because she was stranded in Mexicali, where she raised her children. They put her on a train here in LA, and she ended up in her village in Sinaloa for a year. And it's a long story, but basically it's my interest in genealogy, and also I happened to meet Dr. Balderrama and Dr. Valenciana at a fundraiser, and they had a display of all of the memos with the dates, and as mentioned in the video, you know, they extended an investigation of documentation, and that was the clincher. You know, my mother had, among her things, she never threw anything away, right? But we had, you know what I mean? We had, this is an example. It's a Los Angeles County Health Department admission card, 828 North Gage Street, and this is my mother's younger brother. And this is on the back are the dates that was his vaccination, September 1931. The last one was January 1932. And they were sent to Mexico in February 1932. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And it's great that you're bringing up not only the fact that you were very much involved in understanding your family's history and the genealogy, which is super important, and I highly encourage you all to kind of keep those records too, digitize, and doing those oral histories are super important to preserve that history. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I also want to ask the question to Dr. Valenciana, because your mother was deported when she was young in the 1930s, and then a lot of your work that you brought to light with a lot of these oral histories inspired you to do that work. And I'm very curious in how it must have felt for you, starting with if it was with your mother first or probably with someone else, but learning that history and asking those questions and then continuing to do this work, and then donating it to the California State University of Fullerton.
Well, unlike some of the interviewees that were in Vicente's wonderful production, I knew about what had happened to my mother from an early age. I didn't really understand it, but I knew that her family, that she was born in Boyle Heights. I knew that. And I knew that she had migrated back to Los Angeles. I was born in Boyle Heights myself. And so I'd known about it. But what I didn't know until I took a course, one of the courses I took, because I was an undergraduate history major, and the assignment was to do an oral history project on some cultural group, and of course I knew which group I was going to do it on. So one day I was in the library at Cal State Fullerton. In the old days when people used to walk through the stacks, some of you probably remember that? Before we looked everything up on the internet?
Yeah, yeah, I do.
So, you know, I was kind of a nerdy undergrad, and I was looking in sections that were historical sections, and I happened to find the book North from Mexico, and I thought, oh, this is kind of interesting. Carrie McWilliams, I wonder what this is about. So I opened it up, and in there I saw something that was eye-opening, really, is what it was. And the author was explaining how trainloads of Mexicans left Los Angeles in the 1930s. And you know that saying in Spanish, se me prendió el foco. Oh, I didn't understand that there had been other families besides my mother and her cousins, because her cousins had lived in Riverside, and this had also happened to them. So it was like, whoa, did I find a good topic? So I was pretty motivated to do it. My first interview actually was one of my mother's prima hermanas, and they had, as my mother described it, a very large family. I can't remember right now, but I interviewed several of those siblings. But my tia Teresa was the first one I interviewed, and that was eye-opening. And then I think my next interview was a gentleman that was over here in East Los Angeles, and I was getting prepared to interview my mother because I knew she'd be tough, because after all, I was her daughter, right? And she wanted me to do it the correct way. So I actually started those interviews in 1971, the summer of 1971. And at that time, there was not even, that I could find at the beginning, a dissertation that had been written on the topic. So I was looking at primary documents. And you know, I was an undergraduate, I wasn't a graduate student. So one thing led to another, and I was very privileged and honored to have interviewed some people, especially at the beginning, who were not my relatives. And how did I find those interviewees? Well, I put ads in the church bulletins, and I got contacted by people. And that's how I started interviewing them. And you know, one thing leads to another. And then one day, I was at a conference, and when I came back, you know, this was the old days when we didn't have the cell phones. And one of my sisters said, you know, some guy's been calling you. I think he wants to be interviewed, blah, blah, blah. He's a real nag. He'll probably call back. Oh, okay. So the next day, I get the call, and it was from a young man by the name of Francisco Balderrama. And he introduced himself, and he told me, you know, I'm working on a dissertation, and I have a chapter on repatriation, and I'd like to, I understand that you have some interviews. I go, oh, well, where'd you get my phone number? Oh, you know, I got it from the archivist at Cal State Fullerton. Oh, okay. And I said, he said, so could you share some of those interviews with me sometime? And I go, yeah, one of these days. And I said, so, okay. And he says, well, how about if I come over tomorrow? I thought, mira, nomás, tan atrevido. So that's, you know, one thing led to another. And so I have been very privileged to have interviewed many interviews. In fact, I counted them the other day, and I think it was between 20 and 25. And of course, as time went on, Francisco and I did interviews together, and I was privileged to have interviewed Lupe's mother, Guadalupe Espinoza. And her interview was actually, I think, one of the longest interviews I had. I think it was 6 hours long. And so I never used the word repatriation, ever, because my mother was born in Boyle Heights. Okay? So when I hear somebody say, oh, they sent them back, I go, well, my mother wasn't sent back. She had never been to Mexico. So I could go on and on about the stories that I gathered. For example, you saw Mr. Pina there and what happened to him being shipped from Montana. So we met some really brave people, really persistent people. Now the people in Vicente's family really never made it back, I guess, until your dad came here, right? Okay. My mother was different. She came back when she was 17. She had already started school, and she saw herself as American. You saw her in the interview there, and you know, she said it was a miserable life. 9 years of living in misery, going to school and not really knowing that much Spanish, and being ostracized by kids because, quote, go back to your country. Really? Well, gee, as Francisco said, they weren't allowed to speak Spanish at school, and now we're expected to speak Spanish over here. And then coming back, oh gee, my mother said she'd forgotten a lot of her English, but she was determined to come back. So she came back in 1944 by herself.
Wow.
On a train all the way from Gomez Palacio. She had been in that region for 9 years. And I could go on and on about what she experienced. So I'm going to fast forward it to 2000, I guess it must have been around 2002. And Francisco came home from work one day from Cal State LA, and he said, you know, I was contacted by a state senator, and, you know, he read Decade of Betrayal, and he is interested in possibly talking to some survivors. And he said, you know, we haven't talked to many of these survivors for a long time. I don't even know how easy it's going to be for us to get a hold of them. And he said, and by the way, he also is considering having a hearing in Sacramento. Oh, really? He said, I said, and it was finals. You know, professors are, when it's finals, you know, they're tunnel vision on the exams and all that, right?
I want my former students.
And so I said to him, you know what, Francisco, I don't think that's going to be a problem. He goes, well, how is that? I said, we've got somebody, and she is not going to tell you no, that she won't go to Sacramento. So fast forward, my mother provided the testimony in Sacramento. You saw there where State Senator Joe Den was at the state senate hearing, and so we were sitting back there in the audience, and eventually my mother, and you heard Francisco and Ray, who I was privileged to know and have at our home many, many times, they testified. And then later on, fast forward, after us working on the legislation with many groups, it didn't happen right away for there to be an apology. And I want to make perfectly clear, my mother stood right, I think it was right out here, and spoke with a journalist who said to her, pues, ¿qué quiere, señora? And she said, yo no quiero ninguna recompensa. Lo que yo quiero es que piden perdón. But as Francisco has pointed out so well, someone like my grandfather, who had been living here since 1909, never received an apology, because he was an alien. And I hope none of you, and I doubt if any of you do, but call people out. Don't let any of them call us aliens. That's how we've been othered, calling us aliens. We're human beings. But I get sidetracked. So eventually we got the apology, and I want to encourage you, although it's dark now, to make sure that you see the memorial outside. That's very important if you didn't see it, and I guess you listened to some of the interviews there of some of the people that we interviewed, and we're privileged and honored that they're there. And honestly, when we come to the Plaza, where we've done many, many workshops, we feel like we're with familia, because this was the first museum that paid any attention to us. And so we're privileged to be here and privileged to have worked with many people here over the years, and we're delighted that you're here and you took time out of your busy schedule to be here this evening, especially since it's so darn cold. I did want to add one more thing, and that is that there was legislation also that was proposed for this topic to be included in the curriculum. I can't remember the year that was. It was probably around 2000 and maybe in 2002, the first time.
First.
Yeah, and of course it didn't pass. Sadly, it did not pass. But why were we not surprised? Fast forward, some children, 5th graders in Bell Gardens, found out about this, and they read Decade of Betrayal. And they proposed to their then assemblywoman that it be a law, that it be part of the curriculum. So we were honored and privileged, as well as, so Francisco and I went, and all the kids went. My mother testified there, and the law was passed. So it's part of the California State Social Science and History. So that's the good news, and so we still keep wanting to get the word out in whichever way we can. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Valenciana. And I'm glad you brought that up, because obviously we can see how our panelists are intertwined and how they've been working for many decades to have this history out in the open. And again, it's also a privilege to work with all of you, and dedication that you put for so many years to be here on display and have this discussion. And I want to talk to Dr. Balderrama, because we've now heard from Maria, we've heard from Dr. Valenciana, and how you both have been working for decades on bringing this history up, and I'm very curious if you could share your origin story, how you got involved in doing this research and publishing this book, and then working together to have state state law to ensure that this is being taught in schools today.
Thank you for the question, and first I'd like to clarify a point. Once I was being interviewed on radio, and I mentioned the work of my spouse, Valenciana, right here next to me, and I mentioned it, and they said, "Oh, you're married?" I read her work, and when I was preparing to interview you, I said, "Yes, we're married," and then I said, "Well, you know, I met her many years ago, and then after 2 children, 20 plus years of being married, she finally let me use her interviews." I came to this topic, first of all, when Raymond Rodriguez and I were working in Mexico City in the National Archives and also in Relaciones Exteriores, the Foreign Relations Archive of Mexico City. And I was working on a topic of the Mexican Consular Service, which ended up being a book on the Mexican consuls on Los Angeles. And the grounding behind that was really from childhood. I grew up in a Mexican family. I'm 3rd generation. And a Mexican family that, anchor baby, and in a family in which we had the LA Times and Opinion newspaper. And a grandfather who would always talk about Mexico, would always talk about it, and would always talk about the Mexican Revolution, coming to the interpretation that there were different sides, but they were all good men and women, and that history is a history of progressivism, a history of respecting workers' rights, Mexican nationalism, and a good dose of anti-Americanism in there as well. So, as I was in graduate school at UCLA, Chicano history was emerging. And I had played with the idea of being a Latin American historian. But I was drawn to this new field called Chicano history. And I always wanted to know, well, what is the connection between the Chicano community here and Mexico? And that's where I started working on the Mexican Consular Service. And so this was way back in the days we were talking about earlier. Christine was talking about the internet and the digital world that we all live in today. Well, at this particular point, it was pretty primitive situation in the Mexican archive. Me and Ray sat at a little table, which only 6 people in the world in Mexico City could work at. We would give them little requests for documents, and then maybe after an hour or 2, they would bring us the documents. We looked into a little creepy file system, and that's where we bonded. And I did the book on the Mexican Consular Service, and it was very successful. Got me a job, okay, and got me a career. And I kept going back to this topic, thinking about it, and then finally Ray and I decided to do it together. And you saw Ray in the production. And Ray, even though Vicente's a good friend of mine, I was really close to Ray. Really, really close. And all historians and all writers have a lot of ego. That they think their research and their writing is the best. And if you have the opportunity of reading Decade of Betrayal, it speaks in one voice. Because we basically put aside our own egos, and as Ray said in the video, wanted to get that story out. Which is a story of what happens to to men, women, and children that are betrayed by American society, but also betrayed by Mexico as well. And I think the documentary that Vicente put together with not just Ray and myself, but another multitude of other historians, but more importantly, I see my role as a historian as important, but what is most important is the voices of the people themselves and what they suffered, what they endured. And we need to keep that in mind. As I was saying earlier, as we think of the atrocities of ICE today, which from my vantage point is worse than we saw in the 30s. Much worse. But I am hopeful. What makes me hopeful is what's happened here in LA.
That's right.
What's happened in Chicago. And thank God for Minnesota. Thank God. We did not have that in the 30s. We did not have that outcry. At best, we had sympathy of people that would provide lunches for the people who were shipped on the trains, or having mariachis there playing La Golondrina, that type of thing. There were no strong voices opposing it. But the people in the cold, in the Twin Cities, in freezing temperatures, or the people that we see on No King's Day, Anglo families, non-Mexican families, white families, with signs against deportations, signs keeping families united. That is hope for me.
Yep.
I think I maybe spoke too much. I'm sorry. It's an old habit. My students out there know it. Okay?
Well, thank you, Dr. Balderrama, and I'm glad that you mentioned that because it is very important and it's very much interconnected to what's happening today, and I will touch upon that in a little bit, but I do have a question for Vicente Serrano. You are known for being a journalist and also for the films that you've produced and documented regarding the histories of Latinos and subject matter that a lot of people are not aware of. And so I wanted to touch with you more on the origin of what inspired you to be involved and learning more about the work that Dr. Balderrama, Raymond Rodriguez did, Dr. Valenciana, and then the work that Maria has been doing as well, working, because it's been over 20 years that you've all been working together to make sure that this history is out there.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for inviting us. Thank you for considering our work important today. Thank you for coming out. And I want to first say, gracias, Mama, por estar aquí. My mother is in the audience. Thank you, Mom. My sister and my brother-in-law are here too, are coming from San Francisco. That's the Bay Area. And I want to dedicate, if you allow me to, this presentation to Ray's, in Ray's memory. And I want to share that it has been very complicated, this screening, because this is the first screening after my dad passing. And I want to dedicate this to my dad, which was the person that gave us the idea of what if we go north and let me go and jump the fence and find your grandma's birth certificate and let me research about her story. Let me put the puzzle together. So in his memory, this screening. This is a family story, which is everyone's family. Because it doesn't matter if it happened in the 30s or it's happening today. It's a story of our families. And I remember growing up, my sister might remember this, that my grandma used to cry for 1-2 hours a day. She used to close the door and cry. And I don't know if it happened to you, but I used to ask her, why do you cry? Oh, me estaba acordando de mi mamá y que está muy lejos para visitar su tumba. Oh, I was thinking about my mom and how far her grave is. And we grew up listening to the story that she was born here on Vignes Street in East LA. Well, at that time, growing up, you know, it wasn't nothing important. Rather than having a gringa nana, una abuela gringa, that's all right. But then, fast forward to Vicente Serrano being the news anchor, the youngest news anchor in Spanish in the U.S. in 2002, probably 2003, and reading a story in the teleprompter about the efforts to get an apology, about what happened in the 1930s. And I was reading what the writer put there for me to read. And I'm thinking, that's my grandma's story. How the hell, what a coincidence. And I'm thinking, what if it's not a coincidence? So I went back to ask my grandma, I asked my uncle, I asked my dad, and we started putting everything together. And then I found out about Francisco's and Raymond's work, and it became an inspiration. At that time I didn't know Christine, and then Christine also gave me that, inspired me to do this. I remember asking Francisco, hey, how come, because I asked how many documentaries are out there about what happened in the 1930s, and he said, none. And I said, how come? He's like, because we're historians, we're not filmmakers. Makes sense. I remember listening to Francisco, to Raymond, which I was honored to meet and share time together. And how important it is for the new generations. I'm not so new anymore, but to keep working generation after generation until we all know about our history, until we know where we come from, where we are, where do we want to move to as a community. So it was at the beginning a family thing. I'm a family person. I'm a family guy. And I wanted to honor my grandma. And then I said, this is bigger than my grandma and my family. And I'm glad that we all connected, that we have had screenings at churches' basements, community centers. And through this work, we have found survivors that have, for the first time in their lives, speak out and speak up. Some 80, 90-year-olds crying like babies because finally they are learning the truth. Truth has been revealed to them. Mm-hmm. And they have been wondering what was the story behind what they knew. So I hope after relaunching A Forgotten Injustice, we honor and we give all the credit to Francisco and Raymond's, Christine, Lupe's work, because they are the pillars of these efforts to get the story out. We premiered A Forgotten Injustice in 2008. Almost 20 years later, we realized that it's as, I think, as important
Yes.
as it was in 2008. And if, just for confirmation, can you raise your hand if you're watching the documentary and you're thinking, this is happening today?
Of course.
This is, you're putting our president's name everywhere
He's not our
throughout,
president.
throughout the documentary.
Not mine.
And now that you know, it's your responsibility to get the word out. If you didn't know, it's okay. It was buried. It was not known, an unknown story, but now you know. And you have no excuse to keep it in the quiet, in the dark. And again, thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you, and I'm glad that you brought up those points because we are actually jumping into the 250th anniversary of the United States becoming right in 1776. But obviously when we talk about the history of Los Angeles and the history of Latinos here in the United States, right, there is a longer history beyond 1776. And so, and then the reason why I bring this up is because you all have mentioned, right, your family's history, why you continue to do this work, and the fact that this was done in the 2000s, right, this was done in the 70s, this was done in the 30s, right, but there is a plaque out here outside of La Plaza, and the work you all did for the State Assembly to ensure that this would become taught in schools, and now here we are 20 years later, and we now have ICE raids. We have had protests and things that have happened right in front of La Plaza, right in front of this plaque, and you said, Francisco, close to 95 years ago is where the first raid that was being documented by the LA Times as something that should be happening, and then you have La Opinión saying, no, this is unconstitutional, what they're doing is wrong. So I'm curious to hear from all of you, now seeing this history repeating itself again, and using the words that Raymond used in the documentary, if we don't learn our history, we're doomed to repeat it. How is it for all of you, seeing all the hard work that you've done to ensure that this history is shown and preserved and talked about, is repeating itself again with all of these ice raids, not just happening in Los Angeles, but happening in Minnesota and Chicago, throughout the South, and up in the East Coast.
Are we gonna get a chance?
Vicente and now Esperanza is reminding me of something very important that Lupe and I were talking about before we got started. And I was thinking about it actually quite a bit before today. And that is that so many times it was Francisco, myself, Lupe, and our mothers who did workshops, did town halls, testified in Sacramento multiple times. I can picture both of them because they would come with us. They were always part of our workshops, the four of us. And here were two old ladies already almost 90 or already over 90. And as my mother used to say, I just want for people to know what happened. And basically that's what Vicente and Francisco and Lupe said today. And I can picture both of them. And the last workshop that we did together, which was Francisco wasn't there. It was me, Lupe, and our mothers. And I asked my mother, so, how did you think we did today? And she says, well, she said, I think we did okay, but we were missing Francisco. So it was always us coming together, as Vicente said, as family, because Lupe became part of our family to tell the story. It wasn't no longer just about the individual stories, and I really miss both of them. There's been many times, Vicente, when I've seen the documentary and I moved to tears. I had to hold them back today. And so thank you again, Vicente, and I thank all of you for being here. And please go out and tell the story in whichever way you can. It's really, really, really important. And I don't need to tell you that because Otherwise, you wouldn't come here in this cold weather like we're having today. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, so in 2012, when the state apologized and the county did and a number of others did, both Christine's mother and my mother spoke. You know, they were only given 2 minutes. I remember distinctly because it was 3 in the morning. My mother had prepared her speech, right? You know, my mother was raised in Mexicali and only got 6 years of education because her mother couldn't afford to keep sending her to school. That poverty that Mr. Lopez talks about, it permeated the families in Mexico because don't forget there was a depression. And she laid into everybody and I said, no, they're apologizing to you. So she prepared a 2-minute speech, which is online if you care to find it. And we've worked very hard. I mean, I've worked 20 years, like I said, they've been working 50 years, so that this would not happen again. So you can only imagine how we feel about this current wave, right? Because we keep asking ourselves, why is this happening to us again? Why have we not gotten the respect that we deserve, right? So that is your homework. That's what we need to think, is what is happening or what is not happening, that this keeps happening to us. We have worked really hard because it has to stop.
I was really disillusioned as things built up with Trump. I frequently say that, you know, we had the Mueller report, we had the first impeachment, we had the second impeachment, and then we have the conviction for all those felonies. All that happens, and he gets elected. We have the second term. And, you know, we have that great plan. And in so many other ways, besides this terrible ICE action, this taking away of rights that are enshrined in the Bill of Rights occurring. A lot of ways, I thought this is a total nightmare. But it also brings to my mind the importance of history. History of one's family, history of one's community can ground one with an understanding that you have a place and this place belongs to you. And so, as I said earlier, that what has happened in Los Angeles, what's happened in Chicago, what's happening in the Twin Cities are shining examples. I also mentioned the King's Day marches and protests which are occurring, and we have one upcoming in March. So I'm really asking the audience 2 things. Based upon your seeing of the film, based upon the exhibit here, as well as the plaque that's outside the memorial, and maybe you might read Decade of Betrayal, okay? Okay,
Yes.
get that across. Really asking you to commit in whatever way you can to stop, to protest what's going on.
Of course.
Attend those marches, attend those protests. Help individuals. There are different levels of this. Maybe going to Home Depot. Maybe helping those that you know are undocumented. Provide them with maybe groceries because they're fearful of going to the store. You know all of that. But don't let somebody else do it. Try to incorporate it into your own life and have you do it. I tell you what, you're not only helping them, but you're going to feel a hell of a lot better doing that. And the second thing, I ask you, being an historian, don't let this past disappear. Don't permit them to erase it. Because frankly, This is a sign of fascism. What Donald Trump is doing, his administration is doing right now, by telling the National Park Service, by telling the Smithsonian that they need to change their exhibits. They need to whitewash them.
That's right.
They need to make slavery sound good. And they want to destroy this history of what happened to those men, women, and children. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Let me thank in Spanish a few friends that are here. Gracias Porfirio, gracias Raquelita, gracias Octavio. Sin ellos, y los miembros de la audiencia de Sin Censura, gracias por estar aquí. To some of the members of the audience of the show that I do every day are here, and the friends that are always driving me around, offering me their apartment, or Neljo, who is a muralist, telling the story on the walls of our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. I'm wondering if any of the people like John Eastman are working with the administration right now. I don't know if he's alive or not, to be honest.
I don't know. He lost his position at Chapman University at the law school.
Yeah.
He's also, I think, been disbarred by the Bar Association.
Yay. Good.
So there are some good things that have happened.
I'm wondering if he works for the administration, if he's alive, because this is scary to hear the same language.
Yeah.
Massive deportation, invasion. The guy from Virginia, I think he won an election as a commissioner or something at one point, and you're like, really? I hope that one day someone tells the president about the documentary, or at least the story of Decade of Betrayal. Maybe, just maybe at that time, at that point, under those circumstances, they think about this situation differently. And they see the impact of this rhetoric, this language, the impact that they have in our souls, in our families, to human beings, away from black and white of documents, away from numbers. I hope that with these efforts, no one feels ashamed for who we are, or scared of publicly say who we are. We belong here. We contribute here.
That's right.
And most importantly, we are raising our families here. I have a son, and I wish, teaching by example, that he feels as honored and proud to be Mexican American as I feel. I don't know the extent of the impact that we can have with the documentary A Decade of Betrayal. But I think we're doing what we're supposed to. And not thinking about how big or small the effort ends up being. But it's a time of responsibility. Our responsibility is to do the work, make the effort, and now we ask you to assume that you're responsible, whatever you think that is, because it's almost impossible that we reach the people that you're gonna talk about this. And if we all become the community that we're supposed to, we're gonna make the difference. It's not pretty, obviously, what's going on, but we can make an effort all together to stop it. And I hope that our great grandkids or our nietos and nietas don't have to tell a similar story in 20, 30 years. And that's my hope. And more than, if possible, more than happy to hear questions or, I don't know, sorry Esperanza, because you make this experience rich or richer. When I listen to the stories, this has a soul by itself. It's what keeps me coming to the screenings when I listen to your stories, because I know somehow we're gonna find survivors or relatives of survivors, or you're gonna see your reflection on what you saw on screen. Thank you.